With the new Deadpool movie seemingly to heavily feature Cable, I thought a Summers and Gray family tree would be appropriate to make. The X-Men universe is insane with its wild storylines and alternate universes and timelines, so at times this video will be a little complicated. This family begins with Cable's grandparents. Christopher and Catherine Summers were the parents of Scott Summers, who, if you aren't too familiar with the X-Men story, is better known as Cyclops. They also had another younger son named Alexander. When the four of them were on a flight on their family's private plane, it would be attacked, so Scott's parents attached him and his brother on a parachute and were pushed out in hopes they could escape. Christopher and Catherine were presumed dead, while both kids survived. Scott was left in a coma after hitting his head during the landing. They would be taken to an orphanage where Alex would be adopted, but Scott remained an orphan. Well, since this is a comic book story, there would be a lot more to this backstory. That attack on their family's private plane was actually from an alien ship, and their parents weren't actually killed, but teleported onto the alien ship to be made into slaves. Catherine would be killed in front of her husband after he tried to escape, and it was revealed she was pregnant. The unborn child was placed in an incubator that would accelerate his growth so he could be another slave for the aliens. His name was Gabriel and would become the powerful mutant Vulcan. He could absorb and manipulate energy to do a variety of interesting abilities like flying and shooting energy blasts. Before his death, Vulcan impregnated his alien wife, Deathbird. The child hasn't been born, but is hyped up to be this powerful being. All the Summer brothers seem to have powers related to energy. Alex could absorb energy and release plasma blasts from his hands and chest. Scott could release powerful beams from his eyes, but cannot control it because of the head injury he suffered from after jumping from the plane. Their father would become this space hero named Corsair, with no powers of his own. He's part of a group called the Starjammers. Without powers, he relies on his skills from being an Air Force pilot on Earth, and he's learned how to use alien weapons in space. So you guys all probably know about the romance between Scott and Jean Grey. Well, after one of her many quote-unquote deaths, Scott marries a woman named Madeline Pryor. She looks very similar to Jean, which explains his attraction towards her. Scott leaves the X-Men to be a family man and has a child with Madeline. They named their son Nathan. Not soon after, Scott finds out that Jean was alive this entire time. He immediately leaves his wife and son to be with Jean again. It would be later revealed that Madeline was actually a clone of Jean and was not aware of it. One of the more prominent X-Men villains, Mr. Sinister, was behind this and has been messing with the Summers family for a very long time because of their potential genetics. Sinister knew that the offspring of Scott and Jean could produce a powerful mutant and made sure Scott would have a child with Madeline to make this happen. Jean's clone didn't obtain the mutant powers like the original, however. Eventually Madeline would kill herself and Jean would help raise Nathan. Another big shot villain named Apocalypse would infect Nathan with something called a techno-organic virus that was killing him. The only way to save Nathan was to send him 2,000 years into the future where they would have a cure for him. While in the future, Nathan was cloned before he was cured from the virus. Nathan would grow up to be Cable, and his clone would be his rival named Strife. Strife was kidnapped by Apocalypse not long after being created. He would raise him up to be a villain. Scott and Jean would get married, and during their honeymoon, they are sent into the future to be with Nathan or Cable to raise him. They spend 12 years with him until they are sent back. Cable does return to the present X-Men timeline once in a while as an older man and a very skilled fighter. He has superhuman strength and telepathic and telekinetic powers similar to Jean Grey's. Where things get messy are the introduction to Scott and Jean's children from alternate timelines. In one timeline, they have a son named Nathaniel Grey, and in another, a daughter named Rachel Summers. Rachel would visit the present X-Men timeline and join up with the characters we all know. After learning that Scott was with Madeline when everyone believed Jean to be dead, Rachel changed her last name to Grey and took up her mother's old hero name, Marvel Girl. Rachel has her mother's mutant powers of telepathy and telekinesis. Nate Grey was created by Mr. Sinister using genetics from Scott and Jean. He grew up to be one of the most powerful mutants in the universe, and took up the name X-Man. He was a superpowered being that Sinister always wanted. He also had similar powers to his mother. In the future, Cable marries a woman named Hope, and together raise and protect a child who people are calling the Mutant Messiah. Hope dies in his arms in front of the child after being shot. Afterwards, Cable named the Messiah mutant Hope Summers after his wife. Hope Summers has the mutant powers to copy the abilities of other mutants. Even though they aren't biologically related, Hope and Jean share one huge similarity. They both share a connection to the Phoenix Force. The Phoenix Force is this mysterious entity born from the universe that has the power to completely wipe out the universe entirely. Rachel has also been a host for the Phoenix Force. In an alternate future timeline, Rachel would get together with Franklin Richards. Franklin is a very interesting character from the Fantastic Four comics. He's a mutant whose parents are Reed Richards and Susan Storm, better known as Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman. Franklin would have the broken abilities of being able to manipulate reality along with telepathy and telekinesis, so he's definitely up there with the most powerful beings. In alternate futures, they have a son named Jonathan, a daughter named Dream, and a son named David. These three are also insanely powerful mutants with abilities similar to their parents. Jonathan would become the supervillain Hyperstorm, who basically conquered his entire world. So there is some serious trauma in this family, and I just barely scratched the surface of decades of X-Men comics. The entire Grey family was killed by the aliens who attacked the Summers family private plane. These aliens are called Shi'ar, and are an empire of many different alien species. They exterminate the Grey family in fear of their genes. After everything Scott and Jean go through, even they couldn't stay together. After a lot of traumatic events, they begin to drift apart and fall out of love with one another. Scott would become closer with Emma Frost, but even that wouldn't last. I didn't mention a lot of these characters' deaths because death almost means nothing in the X-Men comics. For example, in one story, Vulcan kills his father Corsair, but of course it wouldn't be too long before he'd be resurrected. Jean Grey is the queen of not knowing how to die, so talking about her deaths and returns could be an entire video on its own. Hopefully you enjoyed this one and it hyped you up to see Cable in the new Deadpool movie. I know a lot of the subscribers and people who watch my channel are solely here for Game of Thrones content, but like I mentioned a few months back, I'm going to be discussing some random stuff I find fun here and there. So if these Westworld and comic book videos bother you, I get it, but it's just what I've decided to do. Anyways, I appreciate all you guys and thanks for watching.